Good morning. We are reading The Wheel on the School by Maynard de Jong, pictures by Maurice Sendak. We are on chapter 12, which is called The Wheel on the School. On Monday morning, the storm hadn't stopped. It raged in fury against the dike. The sea was upended. The spume and roiled spindrifts still flew high above the dike, landing in gray, dirty flecks on the streets and on the roofs. If anything, the storm was more jerky and fitful. Odd, sudden lulls seemed to fall momentarily between the high shrieks and moans of the wind, although behind the dike the sea thundered on. Enormous breakers hurled themselves up and washed in a last, thin, hissing line almost to the crest of the dike. Now and then the spent water of an unusually large wave managed to spill over the dike. In the houses, the fishermen sat loafing in the corners of their kitchens, behind the stoves, if possible, to be out of the way of their busy wives and their children getting ready for school. They were given no peace. In all Shora, the fishermen fathers were pestered by their children. The wheel had to go up on the school, storm or no storm. Just suppose some storks came through tomorrow, Lena argued with her father in the kitchen. Yes, just suppose and suppose, her father barked back. Just suppose you let me be nice and quiet in my little corner. It feels good to be dry and warm and to do nothing for a change. Yes, but suppose the storm ends, then you'll be going out to sea again, and we won't have a wheel up on the roof of the school. There's nobody else but Giannis and old Dalva, and they can't get on roofs. They're lucky, Father said impatiently. It'll be a long storm, I've told you. There's plenty of time. That storm isn't just going to shut off like a faucet. Can't I wait at least for a quieter day? He disappeared behind his week-old newspaper, which, since he had been at sea for weeks, was news to him. News and a refuge to hide behind. He was given no chance to read it. Lena's little sister, Linda, at that moment, insisted on climbing into his lap, and on the other side of the newspaper, Lena still argued with him. The teacher said Saturday that if the wheel could go up today, there'd be no school. So we can all help you, she said to the newspaper. With all of us helping, it shouldn't take long. What does that teacher know about wind and storms? Let him get on a roof in the storm then. And it's off to school with you right now. There'll come a quieter day before we can take off for the sea again, and then we'll see. But off with you, so I can have a quiet day today. It was final. Lena indignantly shoved her feet into her wooden shoes. She knew better than to argue further. She had gone as far as she dared. She buttoned her jacket tightly up around her throat and stamped out of the house. Listen, Yella, how often do I have to tell you? I'm not stirring from this house today, and that's final. A man ought to have a couple days of rest after weeks out at sea without having to sit on top of a school. Now beat it. Get in that school and learn something instead of sitting on top of it. But the teacher said there'd be no school today if we put the wheel up. Well, you can't get the wheel up in this storm, so there is school, and I say so. Or do I have to take you there by the scruff of your neck and the seat of your pants? Yella shoved his feet disgustedly into his wooden shoes and slammed the door hard behind him. Listen, Pierre and Dirk, that's the trouble with twins. A man gets a double dose of everything. One more yammer or argument out of the two of you, and I'll knock you two heads together so hard you'll be lucky if you have one head left between you. Even so, that ought to be enough. You don't use your two heads. The answer is no, no, no. No wheel on no school in no storm. But we'd help all you men. The teacher said no school. And I say there is school, and if you two will be in it, if only I don't have to hear another word about storks. On your way. Pierre and Dirk looked at each other. They glumly shoved their feet into their shoes and moved to the door, muttering dire things to each other. Behind his week-old newspaper, their father sat grinning at their fuming threats. Learn your lesson well today, he teased them. I hear it's going to be about storks. Just so it isn't about lazy, stubborn fishermen, Pierre said stormily. Afraid he'd said too much, he scooted to the door with Dirk close behind him. Their father rustled the newspaper. Dirk pushed Pierre through the door and almost tumbled over him to get out as fast as he could. The door fell shut. Listen, Alka, Don't you ever let up on me. If I hear another word about another stork, I'll take your neck and stretch it until you look like a stork. Then you can go and sit up on the wheel on top of the roof. Storks got more sense than to do that in a storm. How do you expect me to lug a wheel up that roof in a storm? I haven't got wings, and if I should slide down a slippery roof in this high wind and land on my head, who's going to earn the money so you can go to school and fool around with storks? You get to that school. But there is no school if we put the wheel up. Well, nobody's going to put that wheel up today, so there is school. Bye, Alka. There was nothing left for Alka to do but put his shoes on and move off silently. His father watched him. If you stick that lower lip out much further in your pout, you can put that wagon wheel on there instead of on the roof, he teased. Alka said a few wicked things to himself and looked stonily at his father as he closed the door very slowly to let in as much wind and draft as possible. Alka's father, sitting cozily beside the stove in the kitchen, peered around his newspaper to watch Alka slowly putting on his shoes, buttoning his jacket, and pulling up the collar. "Where do you think you're going, son?" "To school," Alka said. "It's Monday, you know, but it's much too stormy to put that wheel up on the roof of the school today, so I suppose it'll be school." He sighed. "I never did have much luck. Bye, Pop." Alka hunched himself to meet the wind that was driving down the street. Ahead of him were all the other school children, bent over, boring into the wind. Unwilling and angry and defeated, each one walked alone on the hard way to school. No one hurried to catch up with any of the others. Each one hated to have to admit that he'd gone down in defeat. And Alka was too slow and far behind and full of breakfast to make the effort. It had been a scheme, hatched and planned after church yesterday. That was what Pierre and Dirk had said to do about fathers, pester them until they gave in. If all the children worked at it, nagged and pleaded, your father would growl and act angry and make wisecracks, but that's the way men are, different from mothers. You didn't get to know your father very well, always out at sea, but that's the way it had to be done. Joke a little and tease and nag and tease. Wait and see. In spite of what your father said or growled, sooner or later he'd do what you wanted. Some of the others had had their misgivings, Alka especially. He'd said that his father would say, "Oh, sure, Alka," and then not do it. But Pierre and Dirk had knowingly assured them all that it was much easier than with mothers. You'd get a sound box on the ear from your mother if you kept on pestering her like that. But then your mother had you yapping around her all the time, so she had less patience. The others, all but Alka, had been easily convinced, especially since the success of the scheme meant that not only would the wheel be put up on the school, but they'd also have the rest of the day free from lessons. It was worth a good try, but Alka had said his father was just too good-natured. He wouldn't be pestered. The scheme had failed miserably. Now each child on his way to school hated to admit to the others that he had failed, not knowing that the others had failed just as completely. The storm was never going to stop. They knew it. There wouldn't be a stork left after the storm. Everything was hopeless and useless, even if there should be one or two storks left over from the storm. What was the good of that? There'd be no wheel on the school anyway, just because of their fathers. They had to face each other in the portal of the school. It was cold in the portal, but at least here they were sheltered from the vicious wind. They all made great pretense of blowing and stamping and beating their arms. They all breathed heavily. "Whew! What a wind!" somebody said. The others said nothing. They eyed each other while they flared their arms across their chests in a great pretense of cold and chill. Finally, Yella turned to Dirk and Pierre as the authors of the scheme. "Well," he demanded, "is your dad coming?"